Hey, good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for some more of our booked participants to join, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Again, good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more participants to join the webinar, and we'll get started. All right, it is 10:05, and I think we will begin this month's service symposium. We're really thrilled this month to have join with us Dr. Boukary Sawadogo. But first, of course, just a quick word about African Services Committee. We are a multi-service human rights agency based in Harlem, and we are dedicated to assisting immigrants and refugees and asylees from across the African diaspora. We provide free and confidential health, housing, legal, social welfare, education, nutrition, and advocacy services, regardless of your immigration status or your ability to pay. So if you have any questions or any needs, please contact us, and we hope that we'll be able to serve you. If not us, we will certainly know people who can. All right, so my name is Amanda Lugg. I'm the interim co-executive director here at African Services. And again, I am thrilled to have Dr. Boukary Sawadogo, who is the associate professor of cinema studies and Black studies at the City College of New York and the CUNY Graduate Center. We're going to hear from the doctor, and then at approximately 10:45, we'll have a Q&A. So please submit any questions and comments that you have in the Q&A box below. So Dr. Sawadogo is an associate professor at cinema studies and Black studies at City College at the CUNY Graduate Center. But as a specialist in African cinemas, he's published extensively on this subject, including numerous film reviews, articles, book chapters, and 3 books. Since 2020, he's the founding director of Harlem African Animation Festival, the first animation film festival in the United States to be exclusively devoted to animated films and series from Africa. Beyond film and media industries, Dr. Boukary's work has been widening in scope and depth to include a study of the encounters and exchanges between African and their diaspora. A particular focus is placed on African immigrants in Harlem. In this respect, he has been teaching a global Harlem course and has also authored the book Africans in Harlem, An Untold New York Story. And for this, we're absolutely thrilled to invite him to speak to us here this morning. Thank you. Boukary?
Yes.
Welcome, welcome. And it's over to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you, and I'm happy to be with everyone. So, okay, sharing, yes. Okay. And so let me start by giving you a quick rundown of how I'm going to address the different parts of this, I would say, conversation, should I say. First, I will give you a background on who I am and where I came from and how I landed and live and work in Harlem here. And then a few words about my work at the CUNY and in City College. And as an entry point into the discussion of the book, I want to give you a brief overview of the research methods that went into preparing this book. And then I will end with the selected readings from the book, and then we'll have a Q&A. So let's start with my background. My background, I will say 2 things. My background is characterized by a very, I would say, transnational and transcultural spaces in which I was born and also have worked through. So I was born in Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa to Burkinabe migrant parents working in the cocoa plantation as was the case and still is the case of millions of Burkinabe working in cocoa plantation in Côte d'Ivoire. And then I went to school in Burkina Faso and college into Senegal. And then from Senegal, I came back to Burkina Faso to go to school again to do diplomacy. And I came to the US for graduate studies, first for my master's, and then after the master, I continued onto the PhD program at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. So that's my trajectory, personal trajectory. In terms of academic studies, I've studied a lot of different things. First with applied foreign languages, and then diplomacy and international relations. And here I am with cinema. And more, I'm still doing cinema studies and also going back to active filmmaking, but also more and more, I have a keen interest in African diaspora. And that my first project on African diaspora, the new African diaspora, I should say, in the US was back in 2013 when I did a documentary entitled African Teachers on the Bayou, which explored the experience, personal, professional of African teachers in French immersion schools in Louisiana. And then after I got my PhD, I lived and worked in Vermont and Massachusetts, and then I came to New York here to Harlem. So, and since 2015, I've been living in Harlem. At City College, I will say my work is I'm primarily based in the Department of Media and Communication Arts, and my specialty is cinema studies, and I teach film theory, history, and criticism in general, for film in general. But I also have developed over the years courses on African cinema, but also courses on a comparative study between African cinema and African American cinema. And for the last few years, I've also developed 2 classes on Harlem, one that I teach regularly for Black Studies program, but also for the Media and Communication Arts program, and one also that I've taught once for the MFA writing program in the English department. And also I am a faculty at the Graduate Center. And this is briefly my background to give you an idea who I am and how I came to this space of Harlem where I am right now. So this book, in terms of research method, I will say it combines archival research and oral stories research method. In terms of archival research, I've used resources at the Schomburg Center in Harlem here, where particularly they have a collection on which is entitled Chronicles of Visit of Head of Third World Head of States and Government to Harlem. And this is it really chronicle visits from African countries, but also from Caribbean countries who came to visit Harlem between in the 80s and early 90s in the framework of a program, not a program, but an initiative called Harlem International Trade Center. It is an initiative that's whose objective was to position Harlem as the global economic or trade center of the third world. And as part of that program, they wanted to build a 44-story building with a hotel, with a cultural center where African languages and cultures will be taught. And the location was right where you have currently the H&M right next to the office, the federal office building, which is, if you know Harlem a little bit, you have right now, we have the Urban League building that is, coming up. So the Harlem International Trade Center was supposed to be around that location. So you will have African visitors that will come to Harlem and meet the dignitaries of Harlem. So I use those resources, but also I use resources at the Apollo Theater. Particularly, I consulted the in-house historian who was very I would say nice enough to give me information about African artists who have performed at the Apollo Theater. And also, I was fortunate that the Riverside Church has opened up the archives on the South African Task Force for me to examine what was the role played by Harlem community and an institution in the fight against apartheid. And we know that New York in general has been a site of resistance, a site of fighting against apartheid, be it the Patrice Lumumba coalition, which was based in Harlem here, or the Riverside Church or other organizations. And that's why one of the reasons why when Nelson Mandela was released in 1990, his first visit was in New York. And when he came to New York, obviously Harlem, and within Harlem, he went to the Riverside Church. Let me pull up one of that photo to show you. So that's a photo from the archives where we see Nelson Mandela at the Riverside Church, and we see here, the participants. So in addition to the Riverside Church, there is also an archive entitled the African Activist Archive at the Michigan State University, where I was able to have information on the East African airlift in 1959 and 1960. And what is the East African student airlift? We have to go back a few years prior to 1959, when the Secretary General of the Kenyan Labor Federation, Tom Mboya, visited the US, giving lectures and giving speeches, in laying the groundwork and pushing for the independence of Kenya, but also being cognizant that once Kenya becomes independent, you will have to train the local, you will have to have a qualified human capital to develop a country. So in that regard, he started lobbying for universities and also for celebrities to help him get scholarship for East African students to come study in the US, but also in Canada. So, and in that, so you have leaders like Malcolm X that welcomed those students when they came to, some of those students when they came to New York. So let me show you two pictures from that archives. So this is one, the East African students on their way to North America. So we don't know if it's Canada or the US, but this is one of the picture on the way to North America. And the second picture, it's so the second picture, you have Malcolm X welcoming and speaking with East African students. So East Africans, because by that time, 59 were not independent yet. So, but most of them were, Kenyans. And so among what we call the East African airlift, you have Wangari Maathai, the Nobel Prize winner of Kenya, who was part of that group, and also for some scholars, you have also the father of President Barack Obama, who was also part of that group. And so we can see the ties between Harlem and in Africa. So that's the archives, and in addition to the archives, I did oral stories, and the oral stories were mostly interviews that I did with the community members. We have the Senegalese community on 116 in Little Senegal. You have the African market on 116. I also interviewed Clara Villarosa, who is the co-founder and co-owner, was the co-founder and co-owner of Human Bookstore, which was at the time in the year 2000, the only Black-owned bookstore in Harlem. And also interviewed Wodago Moges, who is an Ethiopian who came to Harlem in the 60s and gave me a lot of information. And also, I should say a person who has helped me a lot in terms of oral community history is Rashida Ismaili. I don't know if Rashida is here. Is Rashida with us? No, okay. So Rashida was very kind enough to open the doors of her house to welcome communities, different members of African immigrant community, but also African American, for me to present my work and get feedback from them. And for many years, Rashida has been holding a literary salon called Salon d'Afrique. So it is in that space that I presented my work. And I'm going to show you a short video. It's a very amateur video that one of the participants has taped of one of the participants talking about the parallel between African immigrant experience and African American experience here in Harlem, and how they should foster solidarity in the face of systemic prejudice and racism. It's an amateur video, so
New York, in Manhattan, is that there are areas that we had to fight to be a part of. Harlem is one of them. Harlem became a black community when the subway system came as far north as 145th Street. Where Strivers Row became a black block, a black community after World War II, when black doctors that were in the military came into that block and bought homes and so on. What I'm saying to you is what's happening with Africans in New York right now or any place else in this country is not new. Black Americans already went through it and are still dealing with it. And if you want to know how to deal with it, just look at our history. Look at the African diaspora family in this country, in this city. Whether you're from Panama, like Carlos Russell, or whether you're from Jamaica, or what. I mentioned Booker T. Washington III, the grandson of Booker T. Washington. I've had conversations with him the same way I'm having a conversation with you right now. One of the things Booker said to me, he said, Ed, my grandfather was the one that invited Marcus Garvey to this country. Booker T. Washington was the one that was corresponding with Marcus Garvey.
Okay, so this is an excerpt. So now we've come to a point where I will read you excerpts from the book. So for me, no better place than to start with a preface. Okay, here we go. Harlem is the New York City neighborhood located between the Harlem River and the Hudson River, east to west, and between 110th and 155th streets, north to south, although it used to begin on 96th Street, encompassing what is now known as Carnegie Hall. It is subdivided into East or Spanish Harlem, West Harlem, and Central Harlem. Famously, from the 1920s to the early 1960s, Harlem was the intellectual and cultural center of the Black world. The Harlem Renaissance movement, with its wealth of literary and cultural expressions, was the hallmark of that vitality. It brought together Black writers, artists, and musicians from different backgrounds who helped rethink the place of Black people in American society at a time of segregation and lack of recognition of civil rights. This questioning of systemic oppression had reverberation between the US. It inspired the works of the Negritude literary movement to denounce French colonialism and to extol Blackness, which in turn laid the intellectual foundation for the quest for independence of French-speaking Africa. The inspiration to write this book was birthed in Harlem on a Saturday afternoon in fall 2015, a few months after I moved into the neighborhood from Boston. I was sitting in a cafe, working on material for courses I will teach at the City College of New York, when a double-deck tour bus, one of the type Ubicus in New York City, pulled up on the other side of the street. The tourists streamed into the cafe to get beverages before proceeding on the tour of Harlem. One of the tourists stood by my table speaking on her phone. I overheard her saying that she was on a tour of a Jewish history of Harlem. I had never heard of a Jewish history of Harlem, or wonder which landmarks and places they could be visiting. Many more questions entered my head that day. I wonder whether there are African history tour of Harlem. If not, should I consider creating one to put Africa in Harlem on the map, or simply to put African Harlem on New York City sightseeing tours map? What places would such tour cover? Where is the history of Africa in Harlem? With these questions planted in my mind, others began to crop up. In what way should I document and communicate the strong presence of African-born migrants in the neighborhoods, particularly Francophone West African communities? What did I personally know about the different community networks and the vibrant cultural venues that exist in the neighborhood? How can African immigrants' relations to Harlem and with African American be characterized? When and how have African and African American intersected? What does Africa mean to African Americans in Harlem, as well as to African immigrants? What is the future of the various African communities in today's fast gentrifying Harlem? To find answers to my question, I realized it would take extensive and sustained research. So I set out just to do that. Over the next few years, I immersed myself in the history and culture of Harlem, perhaps the most storied neighborhood in America. In doing so, I understood what an emotional experience it is for Harlemites and visitors alike to walk the same street as famous former residents, such as Philip Payton, Madame C.J. Walker, Madame Sinclair, W.D. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Alain Locke, Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Duke Ellington, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Amiri Baraka, or O.C. Davis. Strolling Harlem makes it possible to revisit in memory and the law of the cultural vibrancy and political activism that are closely connected to the neighborhood. Physical markers of its cultural history fill the place: the Apollo Theater, the Cotton Club, Studio Museum in Harlem, the Schomburg Center, City College, the corner of Lenox Avenue and 138th Street, where Marcus Garvey held his first public meeting in 1916. 409 Edgecombe Avenue, which has landmark preservation status thanks to its former occupant, including Duke Ellington, Countee Cullen, Thurgood Marshall, W. Du Bois, and the YMCA, which has seen generation of Harlemites pass through its doors for at least a century, including Nnamdi Azikiwe in 1925, who would later become the first president of Nigeria, or we have also the historical district of the Strivers Row. But Harlem is more than its people. Harlem is more about its people than its landmark, important as they are. Harlem is about the diverse population we see on the streets today, particularly the ever-growing African immigrant communities that have sprung up since the 1980s, when the first Senegalese started arriving in Harlem. From Little Senegal along 116th Street between Lenox Avenue and Frederick Douglass Boulevard, to the African street vendors on 125th Street, to African stores, restaurants, and businesses throughout the neighborhood, the African presence in Harlem has never been more active and visible than it is today. As a member of the Mossi ethnic group from Burkina Faso, I was first surprised to overhear conversation in Moore when I moved to Harlem a few years from Boston. Whereas today I frequently hear Moore and other West African languages being spoken in the street, restaurants, taxis, cafes, or places of worship. That feeling of surprise has gradually subsided as I have come to understand that diversity is part of a local ecosystem. One might say that New York City is such a cosmopolitan city that one is bound to hear all languages of the world spoken here. What makes the linguistic diversity in Harlem so unique, however, is the seamless interaction of residents from various backgrounds who share a strong connection to the neighborhood and its people. Harlem has become a microcosm of a traditional idea of a United States melting pot. From its founding in 1658 as a Dutch farming community under the name of New Harlem, named after the city of Harlem in the Netherlands, to its historical place as the Mecca of Black culture and politics. The influx of different populations from elsewhere in Manhattan over the centuries also have contributed to the area's diversity, as can be seen in Italian Harlem, Spanish Harlem, Jewish history of Harlem, and Irish immigrants moving to the neighborhood in late 19th century, and West Indian in the early 20th century. My first encounter with Harlem goes back to high school in Burkina Faso, in literature and world history classes, where I learned about US history, particularly the transatlantic slave trade and the civil rights movement of the 1960s. In my literature classes, I learned how the Harlem Renaissance inspired poets of the negritude literary movement, such as Leopold Sédar Senghor and Aimé Césaire. For both older and younger generation than myself, music, particularly jazz, hip hop, blaxploitation, and Hollywood movie served as entry points to Harlem and the African American experience. The year 2019 marked the 100th anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance. This book has personal significance for me, not only as a Burkinabe living in Harlem, but also as a faculty member at the City College of New York. Historically, City College has connection with some of African notable writers and intellectuals, such as Chinua Achebe, who has taught there in 1989 for 2 years, and was the 1933 recipient of the Langston Hughes Festival Medal. The Langston Hughes Festival, held annually at City College, honors highly distinguished Black writers, of which Wallace Soyinka, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Amiri Baraka, Maya Angelou, Octavia Butler, and Walter Mosley are just a few to name. As a faculty member of the City College of New York, I'm honored to follow in the giant footsteps of my illustrious predecessors and to celebrate them. For instance, I had the privilege of chairing on December 5th, 2018, a panel on the 60th anniversary of the African classic Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. There, the former South African president, Kgalema Motlanthe, was one of the panelists. The panel showcased continued physical and intellectual connections and encounters of Africa and the diaspora in Harlem, which follow a long tradition. I'm working in a space that is known for its progressive history of providing minority and immigrant groups access to higher education as a means of social mobility. The date of April 22nd, 2019 marked the 50th anniversary of the protest and takeover of the City College of New York by minority students. This protest led to the creation of a Black and Puerto Rican Studies department and program throughout the City University of New York system. The recent racial justice movement of Black Lives Matter, featuring people from diverse backgrounds, highlight the continued fight for racial justice and the activist engagement of young people to bring about systemic changes in society. Prior to that historical event, City College was the site of some of the contribution to what would later pave the way for the civil rights movement and the broader context of the fight against segregationist practices, as Michelle Young noted in her article. The Living Zone Stadium, a Roman amphitheater-like stadium on the campus of City College, hosted in 1946. An NAACP fundraiser for Sergeant Isaac Woodward, known as the Black GI. Some 20,000 people attended performance by musicians such as Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington. In 1969, Martin Luther King Jr. was the commencement speaker at City College. Okay, I'll stop here so that we'll have more time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There's, yeah, so if we can, folks, please feel free to drop your questions and comments in the Q&A box. We have one already, which asks, can you give examples of some of the issues African immigrants indicated during your research? I think you spoke to this during your talk, but I don't know if you'd like to go over that again.
Okay, so the question is, what are some of the issues of African immigrant indicated during my research? I will say during or in the course of the interviews, one of the issues that came up a lot is, I don't want to characterize this as a generational conflict, is the perceived lack of work ethic that parents seems to have of their children, saying that they work hard enough to be in this country to provide opportunities for the children, but the children seem to be less interested or less keen on taking advantage of the opportunity that they have in this country, being education or being jobs. So you have that component. And also the second one is in terms of identity, could be identity or cultural identity, which is how much to let go and how much to take on, which is in terms of integration or assimilation. And also that goes with the second generation, which is with children of immigrant parents. So where would they educate them in African way, or African American or American way, whatever. So there is that question of how much do you let go and how much do you stay yourself anchored in African culture for whatever definition we have. So and also you have a question of community. So what are the resources and ways to build a more stronger community that usually they make the comparison with Jewish community or Chinatown, and saying, hey, we see that they have a community, not only in numbers, but also in terms of economic mechanism. So what should or can Africans do? So those are some of the issues.
That's really interesting. I know we've had similar conversations, just in terms of different services that we can offer the community, particularly around these intergenerational issues. And of course, we're not the only immigrant community to have dealt with this, but I wonder this too, and it's actually come up in the question, Boukary, about how what are some of the ways in which you envision enhancing that communication between African immigrants and African Americans. This is of various ages. But I would also add the question about in the communication between the generations. Do you see that taking? Well, that's really two questions. Let me give you that the one that's written first about enhancing communication between African immigrants and African Americans, if you're able.
Yeah, I would say this part is very difficult because it's a part where I would say kind of a 800-pound gorilla in the room where nobody don't want to touch it, because either it's too hard or simply feelings, emotion is very high on either side.
Right, right.
Yes, and also I would say you have internalized racism, where one side has one image or portrayal of the other. But what needs to happen is it has to be deliberate. It has to be deliberate. Those conversation, it can happen at different venue, different spaces. It can happen, in schools. Can happen in school, and that need to be deliberate. It's not just a chance encounter. And also you have places of worship where you have African immigrants and African Americans who come into these spaces. Those conversations should happen there. And also the larger one, which I think as of now still need to be addressed, is slavery. That's conversation where so far, what is the responsibility of African, the ancestors of today immigrants? What was their responsibility in that? So I think that's it. Once that conversation, at least that conversation has taken place, maybe it will kind of clear the air for more. I would say sustained relationship to happen. Otherwise, as of now, it's more like cyclical, where we'll come together when there is a, I would say very kind of existential or something, a larger Black issue that has global resonance. Beyond that, it's less happening.
Right.
So, and I think.
Sorry, I've often thought of a great forum for that is the Africa Center, down on 110th. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, so I've seen that. Okay, many have already, already booked, and I'm just adding, a 30%, code, coupon that you can get.
All right, thank you very much.
So your question, what's your question again?
Yeah, mine was more around the intergenerational issues that you just spoke briefly about towards the end of your talk, with the children of folks who have arrived here, for better lives for their family, and finding that the children aren't as interested in those academic achievements as perhaps their parents once were. And I just wonder what you see as again, I think, as a forum to discuss those. I mean, given the culture, it's often very much, behind, should we say, behind closed doors, parent to child. But I wonder if there's any opportunity that you may feel that it's something to bring more light to this.
I think I will give an example of what one Senegalese trader on 116 suggested to me, because they said, okay, if a book comes out, make sure that you have an English and a French version so that we can read. And when you have the French version, we want you to come back and have a book conversation where our children and I will be in the same room to discuss some of the issues. Which means that I don't want to say you have to create that, that space, that opportunity, which is, if a book or a movie touches on the topic, it will help, both one of the parents and children to address it in a safer or less, I would say, frontal way.
Right.
And also, I think the different association of migrant communities are also places to have that conversation, except that as of now, most of the time is, it's about, I would say, the social component, which, how can we bring services to, the community, whether struggling or support, but to be introspective in a way to address some of the issues, the intergeneration issue, no. So, and I see a question in the chat.
Yes, we've got a couple more actually.
Yes.
One from Sharita Neverson. The question is, with the success of the US content producers picking up African animation productions, do you find it has helped with the growth of African animation, the African animation industry globally?
I would say the strategy in general, as of now, hasn't led to the emergence of local sustainable animation industry on the continent, because the strategy is based on not even co-production, is licensing deals. So licensing deals, the movie, the animation, the series of films are already produced. So basically you have a deal to distribute them, or you co-produce and you distribute. So, which is, that's my own, the way I'm characterizing is as of now is more, for me, it's closer to extraction of wealth and creative resources than really helping develop something locally. Because if you just give someone resources to make, an animated film or series, and for you to distribute, it doesn't translate. And this one goes to the larger African film industry, where as of now, you have the USA, the giants, Netflix or HBO, or the others who, as of now, has a very keen interest on the continent in terms of content, but as of now, it hasn't translated to local industries like emerging.
Right. Interesting. Thank you. I see another question here, thanking you for the presentation and asking, do you think that African immigrant communities are open to other communities and share social events? This question is from Laba Gerald Wadrago.
Okay. See if okay. So the question is African communities. I will say, I don't want to. I would say from what I see from the organization of African immigrants in Harlem and also in the Bronx is they tend to promote events within themselves, amongst themselves.
Right.
So this, for me, this is the challenge, is to move beyond the community members as the potential participants of events. So in that, I don't, I'm maybe hypothesizing, what is it that the failing of not going beyond African community members? Is it more question to do with, I don't want to say cultural, is it something related to language? Is it language barrier?
Right.
Feeling that, okay, I don't have strong enough skills in the English language?
Sure.
Is it simply failing to grasp the cultural code in terms of the host country culture, that you don't feel comfortable enough to reach out?
Right.
Yeah, so that I think that needs to happen for many things to be able to pick up. I will take a few specific example. So if you have in the African communities musicians, when they have a birthday party or concerts, most of the time it's just something that Africans attend, but they're not in a position to draw beyond their own community. So that's in terms of culture. So I think maybe we should look at I would say how some African restaurants do it in a way that the customer base may be primarily African, but they have been able to draw beyond Africans.
Right.
So in that case, the associations need to go beyond the African communities if they want to be viable, to promote their culture, the businesses.
Right. I feel like, I mean, I'm not basing this on anything I know for fact, but I would imagine that for that topic, I'm sure it's been the same for most immigrant communities that have moved to New York, wouldn't you say? You begin, the events are among your fellow community members, and then as the community builds more agency within the city, as it's been here longer years, then it's in a better position to be able to share with others. What do you think?
Yes, for what I call the first generation immigrant. So you have a challenge of language, and also the overriding feeling that safety is among people from the same country or same ethnic group. So you tend to coalesce around people who look and speak or you think understand you better, your own circumstances, and that's first a human thing. So
exactly.
So
thank you. Well, I think that's all the questions, and it is 11 o'clock. If I could just close with one question. I know as you mentioned in your talk, with Harlem continuing on changing, and the G word, the gentrifying. I know that in the area where African Services is, apparently in another 10 years' time, the area will be known as the Factory District, where you can see already old factory buildings are being renovated into art galleries and other office space. And we even have a hotel being built now on 126th Street and Convent. I just would like to hear just your reaction to that. I mean, it is something that I think we can't stop, right? But how will that affect the growing communities? I know we hear from people all the time about the unaffordability of Harlem now, to actually be able to be based here in Harlem. But we just see we see the expense of being in Harlem, the financial expense just growing and growing and growing. And really just hoping that Harlem can, well, I'm sure it will, but that Harlem stays Harlem,
Yeah, I think the challenge, yeah, you have a chance, the probability that Harlem will have a large transient population where, you know, okay, people will come to Harlem, you know, 6 months or 1 year and they will move out because simply rent is too expensive, or simply coming to Harlem to work, but less residential for some lower income immigrants. And for Africans immigrants, it's very interesting, or at least the irony or even the paradox is how them moving into Harlem has contributed to make Harlem very attractive for many people to move in. And now that is attractive, you know, we're being pushed out. So, you know, okay, is, you know, okay, asked in the book, African immigrant, the gentrifier or the gentrified. And I think that more and more now, even the Bronx that used to be perceived as very affordable is becoming less and less affordable. So so for the African community will be challenged, very, you know, a challenge, because you will need, because we're very simple, you know, 2 remarks, and I will stop here. When I was doing the interviews on 116, Little Senegal, which we can, but from all the stores that I've, you know, interviewed the store owner, none of them own a space there.
Oh, really?
And I've interviewed, many who have been in the same store more than 30 years paying rent.
Wow.
More than 30 years. So if you don't own the space, having been there for 30 years, at one point, if the rent become untenable, you're just, you know, to move out. And if you move out, and, you know, and residential rent is also going up. So at one point, you know, there's no community.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I didn't mean to end on a depressing note by any means.
No.
But I'm thank you so very much. Thank you so very much for everything you shared today. I could go on a little more if we had the time. Actually, I'm interested in the photo that you showed us with Malcolm X and the Kenyan group. To just talking more perhaps about the Eastern African immigrants as opposed to the Western African immigrants, and what the attraction of Harlem is then to more so the Western African immigrants that we see. But maybe we can bring you back. Maybe we can bring you back. So again, everyone, the book, the link is in the chat, and Boukary's very kindly added a link to a 30% reduction discount from the book. So please make the most of that, which I definitely will be doing. So again, thank you so very much for all of your, for the work that you've done on this book and the work that you continue to do in the community. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all who have, joined us for this conversation. Not only early morning, but mid-morning conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and to all a wonderful day. Wonderful day. Thank you.